The ice around her heart cracked the night she offered comfort to a stranger, unaware his hidden fire would threaten everything she controlled. Hello, and a warm welcome. I'm Morgan, your storyteller. Before we dive into this incredible journey, I hope this message finds you well. If you crave stories about unexpected romance, the transformative power of real connection, and how love can ignite where we least expect it, you're in the right place. Prepare for a soul-stirring tale of forbidden attraction, intense internal battles, and a bond forged in silence. This is a story that lingers. You won't want to miss a single moment. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Let's begin this unforgettable journey together. Chapter 1. The city exhaled a pre-dawn sigh, a gray breath fogging the towering glass canyons. Inside the Veridian Gallery, silence reigned supreme, thick and cool as the marble beneath Evelyn Hayes' impeccably polished heels. Click, click, click. Each step was a metronome of control, echoing in the vast, empty lobby. The sound was absorbed by the soaring white walls, the only adornment, the stark, emotionally distant sculptures resting on plinths like frozen sentinels. Light, meticulously calibrated, fell in precise rectangles, illuminating geometric abstracts and minimalist installations that offered beauty without warmth, intellect without invitation. Evelyn moved through this curated world like its undisputed queen, regal even at this ungodly hour, her dark skin flawless against the severe lines of her charcoal gray suit, her posture ramrod straight, sharp cheekbones caught the artificial light, and her intelligent, dark eyes scanned the space with a habitual vigilance, missing nothing. The faint, expensive scent of vetiver and iris clung to her, not a perfume, an assertion, order, power, impenetrability. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass, separating the lobby from the rainy street, was a study in contained perfection, a beautiful, untouchable monolith. Her office, a glass box overlooking the cityscape, was an extension of her persona, minimalist, devoid of personal clutter. A sleek white desk, a single ergonomic chair, a wall screen displaying the gallery's financials. The only concession to aesthetics was a small, perfectly formed obsidian sculpture on her desk. Cold, hard, beautiful. She settled into her chair, the leather sighing softly beneath her. The cold, smooth surface of the desk met her fingertips. This was her fortress. Every object, every ritual, a brick in the wall meticulously built after the jagged shards of past betrayals had cut too deep. Control wasn't just preference, it was survival. Beauty was armor. Art was transaction. The quiet was broken, not by sound, but by a subtle shift in the air. Evelyn's gaze, sharp as a scalpel, flickered towards the open doorway. A shadow moved in the periphery of the main gallery space. Him, the new night janitor, Mark. He was barely a presence, more an absence of disruption. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath faded, utilitarian work clothes that hung just a little too loosely. His movements were economical, unhurried, carrying an air of quiet, almost weary competence. He pushed a wide mop bucket with a soft rhythmic swish-swish across the distant marble floor. Evelyn observed him, not with curiosity, but with the detached assessment she afforded all variables in her environment. Caucasian, late 30s or early 40s, she guessed. Hair the color of damp sand, slightly too long, falling over a forehead, etched with lines that spoke of sun or strain. His face was unremarkable at a distance, handsome perhaps in an unfinished, weathered way, like stone smoothed by indifferent elements, but it was his eyes she occasionally caught, startlingly blue when they lifted from his task, that held a strange depth, a watchfulness that seemed incongruous with his position. He kept them downcast, respectful, almost subservient. She watched his large, capable hands now, dusting the base of a delicate, spiraling glass sculpture. They were rough, marked by labor, yet his touch was unexpectedly gentle, precise. He handled the priceless object with a care that bordered on reverence. The faint, clean scent of industrial soap and worn cotton drifted faintly towards her office, a humble counterpoint to her own expensive aura. He was a ghost, a necessary functionary, existing only to erase the traces of the day, to maintain the pristine facade of Veridian. He belonged to the silence, to the shadows. Days bled into nights marked by the soft swish of the mop, the low hum of the floor polisher passing her door, the quiet clink of cleaning supplies. Evelyn's awareness of him grew incrementally, a subliminal hum beneath her focused thoughts. She noted the worn but neatly tied laces of his work boots left by the service entrance. She became attuned to the specific scent of lemon cleaner he used in her office, lingering after he'd left. Once returning late from a draining board meeting, she found a perfectly brewed cup of chamomile tea, still steaming, placed precisely in the center of her otherwise immaculate desk. No note, just the quiet offering. She'd stared at it, a flicker of something unfamiliar, warmth, confusion, warring with her ingrained suspicion, before she dismissed it as simple, harmless diligence. Tonight, the weight of the world seemed condensed into the glow of her computer screen. A crucial acquisition was stalling, tangled in frustratingly opaque negotiations. The figures blurred before her tired eyes. The usual satisfaction of control felt brittle, stretched thin. The gallery's silence, usually a balm, pressed in, amplifying the low thrum of anxiety in her veins. Her perfectly styled twists felt suddenly tight, a vice around her temples. The crisp linen of her shirt collar scratched against her neck. She pushed back from the desk, the chair rolling soundlessly on the plush carpet. She needed air, or perhaps just a different vista of her gilded cage. The sculptures cast long, distorted shadows. She walked towards the lobby, her heels now muffled by a thick runner. The space felt different at night, less sterile, more intimate, vulnerable. She was halfway across the lobby when it happened. A sudden, violent crack shattered the silence, echoing off the marble like a gunshot, followed by a wet, sloshing sound and the metallic clang of a bucket hitting the floor. Evelyn flinched, her hand flying instinctively to her chest, irritation flashing hot and sharp. Carelessness. She spun towards the source, ready to deliver a reprimand, sharp enough to cut glass. The words died on her lips. Mark stood near the grand entrance, haloed by the dim streetlight filtering through the rain-streaked glass. He wasn't looking at the spilled water spreading across the floor, or the overturned bucket. He was staring down at his own hands, clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. His shoulders were slumped, not in fatigue, but in a profound, crushing weight. His head was bowed, the line of his neck taut with strain. Even in the poor light, Evelyn could see the stark lines of anguish etched around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. It wasn't the pain of a stubbed toe, or a minor mishap. It was the raw, silent agony of a soul breaking. The drip-drip, broth water from the bucket's rim onto the marble was the only sound, a mournful counterpoint to the stillness. Her irritation evaporated, replaced by a shockwave of something entirely foreign, a piercing empathy that bypassed all her defenses. This wasn't carelessness, it was collapse. The sight of such raw vulnerability in this quiet, capable man, amidst the cold perfection of her domain, was profoundly unsettling. It was a crack in the pristine surface of her carefully controlled world, against every instinct screaming about protocol, boundaries, and the dangerous unpredictability of emotion. Evelyn found herself moving. Her steps were silent on the carpet as she approached the spreading pool of water, stopping a few feet away from him. He hadn't looked up, seemingly lost in his private torment. She didn't speak. Words felt inadequate, intrusive. Instead, she turned and walked back towards her office, the only source of comfort she could think of. He remained frozen, a statue of despair. Returning moments later, she held a heavy crystal tumbler filled with cool, clear water. She stepped carefully around the spill, closing the distance between them. He finally lifted his head. His blue eyes, usually so guarded or downcast, met hers. They were bloodshot, swimming with a pain that stole her breath. Up close, the lines on his face were deeper, the weariness absolute. He looked shattered. Still silent, Evelyn extended the glass. The contrast was jarring. The exquisite crystal in her manicured hand offered to his large, calloused, work-roughened one. He stared at it, then at her face, confusion warring with the raw emotion in his eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, he unclenched his fist and reached out. His fingers brushed hers as he took the glass, a fleeting electric contact that sent an unexpected jolt of warmth up her arm. His skin was surprisingly warm, rough against her smoothness. He held the tumbler awkwardly, as if unsure what to do with such delicate opulence. He took a small, shaky sip, the water catching the dim light. Long night, Evelyn finally murmured, her voice softer than she intended, cutting through the heavy silence. It wasn't the reprimand she'd planned. It felt inadequate, yet necessary. He swallowed, lowering the glass, his gaze fixed on the water within. Longer than most, he replied, his voice rough, gravelly, like stones shifting. It held a depth, a resonance, that surprised her, incongruous with the faded janitor's uniform. He didn't elaborate. She watched him, the rigid tension in his shoulders, the way his throat worked as he swallowed again. The urge to offer more than water, some tangible comfort, was overwhelming, irrational. Before she could second-guess the impulse, she reached out. Her hand, small and elegant against the worn fabric of his work shirt, settled lightly, almost experimentally, on his tense forearm, just below the rolled-up sleeve, a point of contact. The effect was immediate and profound. He went utterly still, a tremor running through the muscle beneath her palm. His breath hitched audibly. His eyes snapped to hers, wide with shock, then something deeper, a stunned, desperate gratitude that seemed to pierce right through her. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken tension. She felt the heat of his skin through the thin cotton, the solid strength beneath the weariness. It was intimate, forbidden,
terrifyingly real. Her own reaction mirrored his stillness. A confusing warmth bloomed where her hand touched him, spreading up her arm, flooding her chest. It was a sensation so alien, so unwelcome in its intensity, that it felt like a physical violation of her carefully maintained equilibrium. "What are you doing?" The internal voice was sharp, laced with panic. "He's an employee, a stranger. This is a breach, a weakness." Yet her hand remained, anchored by the sheer magnetic pull of his pain, and the startling connection forged in that silent moment. He didn't pull away. He held her gaze, the turmoil in his blue eyes gradually softening into something raw and vulnerable. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of dismissal, but of acknowledgement, a silent thank you that resonated deeper than any words. The sound of a delivery truck rumbling past on the wet street outside shattered the spell. Reality crashed back in. Evelyn snatched her hand away as if burned, the sudden absence of contact leaving her skin strangely cold. The warmth that had flooded her moments before now felt like a blush of shame creeping up her neck. She took a small involuntary step back, putting distance between them, her carefully constructed mask of composure slamming back into place. Though she could feel a faint tremor in her fingers, she quickly curled into her palm. "See that this is cleaned up properly," she said, her voice regaining its usual cool precision, though it felt brittle to her own ears. She gestured stiffly towards the spilled water, avoiding his eyes now. "Before the day shift arrives." He nodded again, this time the subservient janitor resurfacing, his gaze dropping respectfully to the floor. "Yes, Miss Hayes, right away." His voice was subdued, the earlier resonance buried. Evelyn turned on her heel, the click of her heels suddenly loud and jarring in the resumed silence, as she walked briskly back towards the sanctuary of her office. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The image of his devastated face, the feel of his warm skin beneath her hand, the startling blue of his eyes filled with unspoken gratitude, it was imprinted on her mind, a vivid, unsettling after-image. Closing her office door softly behind her, she leaned back against it, the cool glass a shock against her spine. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. The scent of vetiver and iris seemed cloying now. Underneath it, faint but persistent, lingered the clean, soapy scent that clung to his clothes. Her forearm, where she had touched him, tingled as if branded. The obsidian sculpture on her desk caught the light, cold and impenetrable. A fortress. Yet, somewhere deep within the meticulously constructed walls, a hairline fracture had appeared. It was small, almost invisible, but the tremor it sent through her foundation was undeniable. Control, her most prized possession, felt suddenly slippery, and the silence of the gallery no longer felt empty. It hummed with the echo of a shared forbidden moment, and the unsettling, electric memory of a touch that should never have happened. The unseen current had found its first crack.
Chapter 2. The spilled water dried, leaving only a faint, ghostly outline on the Veridian's lobby marble. But the mark left on Evelyn Hayes felt indelible, a brand on her carefully curated composure. Days bled into a week, then two, each sunrise finding her fortress subtly altered, its walls vibrating with an unsettling new frequency. The gallery, once a sanctuary of cool, predictable order, had become a landscape charged with invisible currents. Her awareness of Mark, his schedule, his movements, the very scent of him, was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of her thoughts, a persistent static disrupting her internal broadcast of control. She found herself listening for the soft swish-swish of his mop in distant galleries, a sound that now carried an unexpected weight. The low mechanical drone of the floor polisher passing her office door wasn't just background noise, it was a signal pulling her attention momentarily from spreadsheets and acquisition proposals. She'd glance up, her gaze drawn magnetically to the frosted glass panel, catching the blurred silhouette of his broad shoulders moving with unhurried efficiency. A phantom warmth would prickle along her forearm, where her hand had rested on his sleeve that night. Her walks through the gallery became exercises in heightened perception. She'd noticed the worn but meticulously tied laces of his work boots tucked neatly beside the service entrance. Once, passing the delicate glass sculpture he'd been dusting, she paused. The surface seemed to shimmer with an extra clarity, catching the light in facets she hadn't appreciated before. Had he polished it with particular care? Ridiculous. Yet the thought lingered. The scent was the most insidious invasion. The clean, sharp tang of lemon cleaner he used on her office surfaces clung stubbornly, even hours after he'd left. It mingled unsettlingly with her own veteran iris, creating a discordant yet strangely compelling olfactory signature. One afternoon, returning frazzled from a particularly combative meeting with a difficult artist's agent, she pushed open her office door and stopped short. On her desk, precisely scented, sat a steaming mug of chamomile tea. The scent, warm and floral, filled the small space, no note, Just the quiet offering, replicating the gesture from weeks before. This time, however, the simple act felt loaded, intimate, a silent understanding that bypassed words and rank. She picked up the mug, the heat seeping into her palms, a direct counterpoint to the cold knot of tension in her stomach. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her, a balm she hadn't known she craved. He noticed. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Her internal landscape mirrored the shifting gallery. The crisp lines of her tailored suits felt suddenly constricting, the starched collar of her blouse an irritant against her skin. Her perfectly coiffed twists, usually a crown of control, began to feel heavy, tight against her scalp, a physical manifestation of the pressure building inside. Catching her reflection in the gallery glass, the sharp cheekbones, the intelligent dark eyes, the regal posture, she saw a flicker of something unfamiliar beneath the polished surface. A restlessness, a yearning that tightened her jaw and quickened her pulse whenever she heard the swish of the mop nearby. She'd smooth her skirt, a gesture meant to reassert order, but it felt futile. This is absurd, she'd chastise herself, staring unseeingly at a financial report. He's the janitor, an employee, a quiet man doing his job. She rationalized her heightened awareness as professional oversight, an appreciation for diligence. But the rationalizations rang hollow against the visceral memory of his warm skin beneath her fingertips, the startling vulnerability in his blue eyes. The forbidden thoughts intruded with increasing frequency, vivid and unwelcome, the imagined texture of his work-roughened palm against the smooth skin of her cheek, the heat of his body standing close in the shadowed gallery, the low rumble of his voice saying something not about cleaning supplies. She'd shiver, a reaction entirely separate from the gallery's carefully maintained climate, and force her attention back to the cold logic of numbers. Control was slipping through her fingers like fine sand, and the sensation was profoundly unnerving. One cool Wednesday evening, as dusk painted the city in bruised purples and oranges outside the gallery windows, Evelyn found herself lingering near the contemporary photography exhibit. She was ostensibly reviewing the placement of a new acquisition, a stark black-and-white series capturing urban decay. Her attention, however, was fractured. Mark was cleaning the far end of the long gallery space. The rhythmic sound of his movements was a siren song she couldn't ignore. He was polishing the brass railing surrounding a particularly imposing abstract metal piece. She watched, mesmerized despite herself, by the deliberate circular motion of his arm, the play of muscle beneath the thin cotton of his work shirt. The fading light from the high windows caught the planes of his face, highlighting the worn lines, the concentration in his downturned gaze. He seemed utterly absorbed, a world unto himself. Yet, as if sensing her scrutiny, his movements slowed. He didn't look up, but a subtle tension entered his posture. Evelyn forced herself to look at the photograph in front of her, a close-up of cracked concrete and struggling weeds. She traced the lines of the image with a fingertip on the glass frame. "This series," she began, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet space, "it finds a strange beauty in the broken, wouldn't you say?" He paused his polishing, the cloth still in his hand. He finally lifted his head, his blue eyes finding hers across the distance. There was a flicker of surprise, then a cautious intelligence. "Beauty's resilient, Miss Hayes," he replied, his voice that low, gravelly tone that resonated in her chest. "Finds a way through the cracks. Even concrete can't hold it back forever." He gestured slightly with the cloth towards the photograph. "Like those weeds. Looks like chaos, but it's just life insisting." Words struck her, simple yet profound. They spoke of an observation deeper than surface cleaning. "Life insisting," she echoed softly, turning fully to face him. The space between them felt charged, the gallery shrinking, against all odds, against the cold order we try to impose. The words felt dangerously close to a confession. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, barely there but transforming his weary face. "Order's got its place, sure, makes things run smooth." He took a step closer, not encroaching but reducing the void. He nodded towards the gleaming railing he'd been polishing. "Keeps things looking sharp, prevents tarnish." His gaze held hers, the blue intense in the dimming light. "But too much polish hides the real character underneath, don't you think? The history, the stories the metal could tell." Her breath hitched. Was he still talking about the railing? The double entendre hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Flirtation, disguised as philosophy. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. "Perhaps," she conceded, forcing her voice to remain level, though a warmth spread across her collarbones. "But tarnish leads to decay, neglect." She tilted her chin, meeting his gaze with a challenge. "A little care, a little polish, preserves what's valuable." His eyes didn't waver. "True enough. But value's in the eye of the beholder, Miss Hayes. Some might see the tarnish as the valuable part. Proof it lived, proof it endured." He took another half step, close enough now that she could see the faint stubble along his jawline, the tiny flecks of darker blue within the irises. The clean scent of soap and warm cotton enveloped her.
Sometimes, he added, his voice dropping almost to a murmur, the most beautiful things are the ones that show they've been touched by the world, not locked away behind glass. The air crackled, the photograph before her blurred. His words felt like fingers tracing the carefully constructed armor around her heart. Touched by the world. Was that vulnerability or strength? He was standing too close, speaking too deeply, looking at her not with the deference of an employee, but with the focused intensity of a man, fascinated. It was exhilarating and terrifying. She held his gaze, the silence stretching taut between them. The unspoken tension was a physical thing, humming in the space separating their bodies. Preservation requires boundaries, Mark, she finally said, her voice huskier than intended. Glass protects. It allows observation without contamination. Her lips quirked again, a hint of that devastating, almost smile. Observation safe, he agreed, his eyes drifting momentarily to her lips before snapping back to hers. A jolt of electricity shot through her. But it's a cold kind of knowing, wouldn't you say? Like appreciating a fire by staring at a painting of one. He shifted his weight, the movement bringing him infinitesimally closer. The heat radiating from him was palpable. Doesn't warm your bones. Warm your bones. The phrase echoed in the hollow spaces inside her. She felt exposed, dissected by his quiet perception. This wasn't banter. It was a dance on the edge of a precipice. She needed to retreat, to reassert the glass wall between them, yet her feet felt rooted to the spot. Fire can burn, she countered, lifting a hand unconsciously to adjust her collar, her fingers brushing the suddenly sensitive skin of her throat. Can do, he nodded, his gaze tracking the movement of her hand. But it also cooks your food, lights the dark. His voice softened further, keeps you alive on a cold night. Worth the risk, some might say. He paused, his blue eyes holding hers with an unnerving directness. Depends on what you're freezing for, I suppose. The question hung, heavy and unanswerable. What was she freezing for? This control, this sterile perfection, the fear of being burned again. His proximity, his words, the raw honesty beneath the janitor's guise. It felt like an antidote to the ice she'd encased herself in. The urge to lean into that warmth, to let it thaw her, was a physical ache. It was madness. The sudden shrill ring of her office phone shattered the moment like dropped crystal. They both flinched, the spell broken. Evelyn took a sharp step back, the cool gallery air rushing into the space where his warmth had been. Her professional mask slammed down, though her cheeks felt flushed, her breath uneven. I have to take that, she said, her voice clipped, betraying none of the turmoil inside. She turned, her heels clicking decisively on the marble, a rapid retreat towards the sanctuary of her office. She didn't look back, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her retreating form, a tangible pressure between her shoulder blades. Alone in her glass box, she leaned heavily against her desk, the phone still ringing insistently. She didn't pick it up, her heart hammered against her ribs. Worth the risk? His words echoed. She touched her throat where her fingers had brushed, the skin still tingling. The scent of lemon cleaner seemed stronger than ever. The polished obsidian on her desk reflected a distorted version of her face, the eyes wide, the lips slightly parted. Not untouchable, not in control, touched, contaminated, or awakened. The silent encounters became charged landmines, passing him in a narrow corridor, their shoulders nearly brushing, the air thick with unspoken words and magnetic pull. The briefest meeting of eyes before he respectfully looked down, a fleeting connection that sent sparks along her nerves, finding him meticulously cleaning a large abstract canvas she secretly loved, his reflection overlapping hers in the protective glass, a momentary merging that felt shockingly intimate. Her hyper-awareness was a constant thrum. She noticed the way a lock of sandy hair fell across his forehead when he bent to empty a trash bin, the precise way he folded his cleaning rags, the quiet sigh he sometimes emitted when he thought he was alone. Each detail was catalogued, a secret treasure hoarded against her better judgment. Her internal conflict escalated. The tailored suits became cages. She found herself opting for a slightly softer silk blouse one day, then immediately regretted it, feeling exposed. The gallery's pristine white walls began to feel oppressive, sterile, a reflection of her own emotional lockdown. She started sketching again in stolen moments, something she hadn't done in years. Quick, passionate charcoal strokes capturing not curated beauty, but raw emotion, the curve of a tense shoulder, the stark lines of weariness around intense eyes, the interplay of shadow and light on a strong jaw. She hid the sketches fiercely, a tangible manifestation of her dangerous preoccupation. One evening, during a late opening event for a major donor, the tension reached a breaking point. Evelyn was performing her role flawlessly, gracious, composed, the impeccable director navigating the sea of wealth and privilege. The gallery buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, and the self-satisfied hum of influence. She wore a severe black sheath dress, armor against the social fray. Mark was present, a near-invisible presence in the background, emptying discreet bins, wiping away fingerprints with silent efficiency. She was acutely aware of his every movement, a fixed point in her peripheral vision. She was discussing a potential acquisition with Lady Armitage, a notoriously difficult patron, when it happened. Lady Armitage, gesturing broadly with her champagne flute, nearly collided with Mark as he maneuvered a discreet rolling bin behind a potted fern. Instead of an apology, she recoiled as if touched by something foul. Honestly, she snapped, her voice cutting through the polite murmur. Must you skulk about like that? Have some awareness. These shoes cost more than you make in a year. Her lip curled in undisguised disdain as she looked Mark up and down, her gaze raking over his simple work clothes. Mark froze, his head bowed, shoulders tensing. He murmured something low, an apology, but the damage was done. The small cluster of people nearby fell silent, watching the uncomfortable scene. Lady Armitage sniffed. Disgraceful. Evelyn, really, your staffing choices. Something primal snapped inside Evelyn. A white-hot fury, hotter and more immediate than any boardroom battle rage, surged through her. The carefully constructed walls of protocol and social nicety evaporated. Before thought could intervene, she moved, stepping smoothly between Lady Armitage and Mark, her posture radiating an icy authority that made the older woman take an involuntary step back. Evelyn didn't raise her voice, but it carried, cold and sharp as a diamond blade. The only disgrace here, Lady Armitage, Evelyn stated, her dark eyes fixed unblinkingly on the patron's startled face, is your lack of basic courtesy. Mr. Henderson performs an essential service with diligence and respect. You will afford him the same. The use of his surname, the formal Mr., was deliberate, elevating him instantly in the hierarchy of the room. The silence was absolute. Lady Armitage gaped, momentarily speechless. The onlookers stared, shocked by the director's uncharacteristic public rebuke. Evelyn held the woman's gaze, unwavering, a queen defending her territory. The controlled fury in her posture was more terrifying than any shout. Finally, Lady Armitage huffed, her face flushed with outrage and embarrassment. Well, I never. She turned on her heel and stalked away, radiating indignation. The moment she was gone, the tension didn't dissipate. It shifted, condensing into the space between Evelyn and Mark. She turned slowly, the mask of icy authority still in place, but beneath it, her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She met his gaze. He was staring at her, utterly still. The subservient mask was gone. His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. A raw, stunned gratitude. Yes, but deeper, far deeper. It was a look of profound recognition, of awe, of something akin to devotion. He saw her, not the director, not the untouchable Ice Queen, but the woman who had just shattered protocol and social standing to defend him, unaware of who he truly was. The sheer terrifying honesty in his gaze was a mirror reflecting back the dangerous depth of her own actions. Her carefully maintained resolve, the fortress wall she'd been desperately reinforcing since the night of the spilled water, didn't just waver, it cracked. Visibly, her breath caught. She felt a tremor start deep within her core, a seismic shift she couldn't control. It traveled up her spine, manifesting in her hand, the hand that had touched his arm, the hand that had sketched his profile in secret. It lifted slightly, involuntarily towards him, a silent echo of that forbidden contact. Then, with a visible effort that tightened the muscles in her forearm, she clenched it into a fist, forcing it back down to her side. The knuckles stood out white against her dark dress. The air between them crackled, thick with everything unsaid, everything forbidden, everything laid bare in that single, explosive act of defense, and the raw, answering look in his eyes, the polished marble floor, the priceless art, the murmuring guests, they all faded into a distant blur. There was only the silent, shattering understanding passing between them in the charged space, and the visible tremor in her clenched fist, the first undeniable fissure in the glacier of her control. The unseen current had deepened, pulling them both towards an inevitable, terrifying plunge.
Chapter 3. The Veridian Gallery. Usually a temple to hushed contemplation, thrummed with a different kind of energy tonight. Crystal chandeliers blazed, refracting light onto polished marble and the gleaming frames of multi-million-dollar artworks. The air shimmered with the clink of fine glassware, the murmur of cultivated voices, and the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume layered over the underlying scent of wealth and ambition. It was the Aether Systems Gala, a crucial, high-stakes event designed to secure the tech giant's multi-million-dollar sponsorship. Evelyn Hayes stood at the epicenter, a pillar of cool composure, in a column of liquid silver silk that clung to her regal frame. Her dark skin glowed under the lights, her sharp cheekbones accentuated by a subtle sweep of highlighter. She moved with practiced grace through the throng of CEOs, socialites, and art world luminaries, her smile precise, her handshakes firm, her dark eyes missing nothing. Director Hayes, in her element, the fortress walls, momentarily fissured by her defense of Mark, seemed rebuilt, reinforced by the sheer necessity of the night. Inside, however, the tremor from Lady Armitage's confrontation lingered, a low-frequency vibration beneath her ribs. Her gaze, despite her focus, kept drifting towards the periphery, seeking the familiar, grounding shape of faded work clothes, the quiet competence of Mark. But tonight, the background staff were different, catering uniforms, efficient and anonymous. Mark's shift had ended hours ago. His absence felt like a phantom limb, a disquieting void in the carefully orchestrated spectacle. She caught herself smoothing the silver silk over her hip, a nervous gesture disguised as adjusting her dress. Control, she reminded herself, taking a slow sip of mineral water, the cold liquid doing little to quench the strange dryness in her throat. The memory of his raw, grateful gaze after her defense burned brighter than the chandeliers. He saw you, truly saw you. She was discussing the subtle interplay of light in a newly acquired holographic installation with a prominent critic, her voice smooth, analytical, when the first ripple of disturbance moved through the crowd, a subtle shift in the ambient noise, a collective intake of breath near the grand entrance. Heads turned, conversations faltered mid-sentence. Evelyn's professional smile remained fixed, but her internal radar spiked. Important arrival. Then the crowd parted near the towering glass doors, like water yielding to a ship's prow. The gallery director accompanying the arrival wore an expression of awed deference, and then Evelyn saw him. He walked into the blaze of light, not in faded cotton and worn boots, but in a suit that seemed woven from shadows and starlight, charcoal so deep it was almost black, cut with razor-sharp precision that sculpted his broad shoulders and lean frame. The rough hands she'd imagined against her skin were now partially obscured by crisp white cuffs and a heavy platinum watch that glinted with cold fire. His hair, the color of damp sand, was ruthlessly styled, revealing a strong, intelligent forehead, free of the weary lines she knew. But it was the eyes that stopped her heart. The same startling, intense blue, but stripped of their watchful deference, now radiating a formidable magnetic command. They scanned the room with an air of absolute ownership, missing nothing, assessing everything. Marcus Thorne, the reclusive, notoriously demanding CEO of Aether Systems, the architect of tonight's high-wire act. Recognition slammed into Evelyn like a physical blow. The air vanished from her lungs. The cool glass of her water tumbler became a block of ice in her suddenly nerveless hand. Mark, the lines of his face, weathered by imagined labor, now reassembled into an undeniable, powerful whole. The rough jawline she'd sketched was clean-shaven, revealing a strength that was aristocratic, not workmanlike. The quiet weariness replaced by an aura of contained, terrifying energy. The scent of lemon soap and worn cotton was obliterated by the expensive, complex notes of sandalwood and vetiver, a dark, sophisticated echo of her own perfume, mocking her. The world tilted violently. The glittering crowd, the clinking glasses, the soaring art, it all blurred, receding into a dizzying, nauseating distance. Her meticulously constructed mask shattered, utterly. For one horrifying, unguarded moment, raw betrayal, scalding humiliation, and white-hot rage contorted her features. She felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold, then flood back in a burning wave that prickled across her scalp and down her neck. Her grip tightened on the glass, knuckles bleaching white. A fraud, a spy, a billionaire playing dress-up in her world, watching her unravel. The memory of her hand on his arm, her defense of him, the chamomile tea, the charged silences, the philosophical flirtation, it all curdled into a sickening farce. He hadn't seen her, he'd been auditing her. Her fortress wasn't just cracked, it was vaporized. She wrenched her gaze away, slamming the mask back down with a force that made her jaw ache. The composure that settled over her features was glacial, harder and colder than the Veridian's marble. She turned sharply back to the critic, who was staring at her, perplexed by her sudden pallor and rigidity. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice stripped of all warmth, a shard of ice, a pressing matter. She didn't wait for a response, turning on her impossibly high silver heels and walking away with rigid precision, every step a testament to her unraveling control. She needed air, she needed to be anywhere but here, under the gaze of the man who had just demolished her reality. The relative quiet of a deserted side balcony was a reprieve, however temporary. The muffled sounds of the gala were a distant hum. The city sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of cold, indifferent lights. the night air, sharp and carrying the scent of rain on distant pavement, bit into her exposed arms, but she welcomed the physical shock. She gripped the cold metal railing, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps she fought to suppress. The silver silk felt like a shroud. Betrayal warred with the visceral memory of his vulnerability that night, the slumped shoulders, the raw pain in his eyes. Had that been an act too? A carefully staged moment to manipulate her. The thought was acid, yet the sketch she'd hidden, the lines capturing his weariness, his quiet observation. Had that keen perception been the CEO, not the janitor? The contradiction was maddening. She didn't hear him approach. His presence announced itself first by a shift in the air, a subtle displacement of energy, then by the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, sandalwood and vetiver, now a weapon. Her spine stiffened further, every muscle locking. She didn't turn. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the charged space she radiated. The silence stretched, thick with the debris of shattered identities. The city lights flickered below, indifferent. Mark's gravelly warmth was gone, replaced by a lower, more resonant timbre, the voice of command, yet stripped bare. It held no arrogance now, only a profound, unsettling rawness. She remained frozen, staring blindly at the urban sprawl. The sound of her name on his lips, Marcus Thorne's lips, was another violation. I know, explanations are meaningless right now, he continued, the words careful, measured, yet vibrating with an intensity that cut through the night air. Anything I say will sound like a lie, or an excuse, and it probably is. A pause. She heard the rustle of fabric, but this isn't. Against her will, her gaze flickered sideways. He held something small, slightly crumpled, in his outstretched hand. Not a business card, not a contract. It was a torn piece of thick packing paper. On it, rendered in confident, spare charcoal lines, was her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the elegant curve of her neck, the focused intensity in her downcast eyes as she examined a sculpture weeks ago. He'd captured her essence, the regal control, the fierce intelligence, the hidden depth beneath the polished surface. It was undeniably her, drawn by him, by Mark, by Marcus. Her breath hitched, a traitorous sound in the silence. The betrayal deepened, twisting into something more complex, more agonizing. He hadn't just watched, he'd seen. He'd seen what she hid from the world, what she barely acknowledged herself, and he'd drawn it, preserved it, on this humble scrap of paper. Why? The word tore from her throat, hoarse, barely audible. It wasn't about the audit anymore. It was about this, the seeing, the drawing, the unbearable intimacy of it. Because you were incandescent, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion now, the CEO facade crumbling completely. In that cold, controlled space, a force of nature contained. I watched you move, watched you think, watched you care about the art, about the people who made it, even when you hid it behind that. He gestured vaguely towards the gala, towards her professional armor, that impeccable armor. As Mark, I saw the woman Marcus Thorne hadn't encountered in a decade of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Someone real. He took a half-step closer, the paper still held out like an offering, a confession. The audit, it became irrelevant. The moment you handed me that glass of water, the memory flooded back, the crystal tumbler in his rough hand, her touch on his arm, the spark, the warmth. Had that been real? For both of them, the fortress walls inside her, already reduced to rubble, trembled under a new assault. Not rage, but a terrifying surge of grief for the connection she'd thought she'd found, the vulnerability she'd offered to a phantom. It traced a scalding path down her cheek, a shocking breach in her glacial composure, a physical manifestation of the devastation within. She didn't sob, she didn't move, just that one, silent betrayal by her own body. He saw it, his breath caught audibly, the carefully maintained distance collapsed. He closed the remaining space between them in one stride, not to embrace her, not to demand. His hand, the hand that had wielded a mop, that had sketched her profile, that signed billion-dollar deals, lifted slowly, hesitantly. His thumb, calloused even now beneath the veneer of wealth, brushed against her cheekbone with infinite tenderness, catching the tear before it could fall further. The contact was electric, devastating. It wasn't the fleeting, accidental touch of weeks ago. This was intentional, reverent. A current arced between them, bypassing shattered trust and tangled lies, connecting on a primal level of shared pain and undeniable, terrifying attraction. His skin was warm, the roughness a shocking, grounding counterpoint to the satin of her cheek. She felt the tremor in his hand, mirroring the earthquake inside her own chest. She didn't pull away, couldn't. The sensation short-circuited her fury, her humiliation, leaving only raw, exposed nerve endings. Her eyes, wide and dark with shock and unshed tears, lifted to meet his with theirs. The blue depths were no longer commanding, but naked, vulnerable, filled with a desperate plea and an agonizing regret. He wasn't Marcus Thorne, billionaire CEO. He wasn't even Mark, the quiet janitor. He was a man,
laid utterly bare before her, his carefully constructed worlds, both of them, collapsing around him because he'd seen her, truly seen her, and been irrevocably changed. His thumb lingered for a heartbeat longer, smoothing the damp trail on her skin, a silent apology, a benediction, the scent of sandalwood and vetiver mixed with the salt tang of her tear. The muffled gala sounds were a universe away. There was only the cold balcony railing at her back, the vast indifferent city below, and the devastating warmth of his touch on her face, the silent scream of connection in his eyes, and the crumpled sketch held forgotten in his other hand, proof that the seeing had been real, even if everything else was a lie. The shattering was complete. What remained was a terrifying open void, and the undeniable consuming pull of the man who had created it.
Chapter 4. The cold metal railing bit into Evelyn's back, a stark counterpoint to the lingering heat where Marcus Thorne's thumb had traced the path of her tear. The city lights below blurred into streaks of gold and white, mirroring the chaotic swirl within her. Shattered trust lay like glittering shards around them on the balcony. The crumpled sketch in his hand felt less like an offering and more like a grenade pin pulled. Yet, the devastating tenderness of his touch, the raw vulnerability in his CEO blue eyes stripped bare. It had carved a fissure through the bedrock of her fury. Silence stretched, thick with the weight of revelation and the terrifying pull of the abyss he'd opened. He didn't move, his hand hovering near her face, as if afraid any further contact would shatter the fragile truce his gesture had forged. His breath fogged slightly in the chill air. The scent of him, expensive sandalwood and vetiver, a cruel echo of her own armor, was now inextricably mixed with the salt of her tear, creating a dissonant, intimate perfume. "I should hate you," Evelyn whispered, the words scraping her throat. Not a shout, but a raw confession that carried further in the quiet than any scream. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the indifferent city. "I do hate the lie, the violation. I know." His voice was low, rough with remorse. "I deserve that. I deserve all of it, every ounce of your anger." He finally lowered his hand, clenching it briefly at his side. "But Evelyn, Mark, he wasn't entirely a lie. The weariness, the watching, the seeing you, that was the most real thing I've felt in years, maybe ever." She finally turned her head, meeting his eyes. The intensity was still there, the formidable CEO intelligence, but overlaid now with a desperate honesty that disarmed her. Why? The question was simpler this time, stripped of accusation, seeking only understanding. Why the charade? Why me? He ran a hand through his ruthlessly styled hair, a gesture that momentarily recalled the weary janitor. Evelyn needed a new direction, philanthropy, genuine connection, not just tax breaks. Veridian, it was a potential flagship, but reports, boardroom presentations, they're bloodless. I needed to feel it, see how it operated when the director wasn't performing for the CEO. A wry, self-deprecating twist touched his lips. "And you were a force, impenetrable, fascinating. I thought seeing you in your natural habitat, unguarded." He shook his head. "I never planned to feel, to be seen back, to crave." He trailed off, the unspoken word, "you," hanging heavy in the air between them. The balcony door slid open, spilling out a burst of gala noise and warm light, along with the anxious gallery director. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Thorne, is everything all right? The guests are asking." Evelyn straightened instantly, the director's mask snapping back into place, though it felt thinner, more fragile. Marcus Thorne turned, his CEO persona reassembling just as quickly, though his eyes remained fixed on Evelyn for a beat too long. "Everything's fine, David," Marcus said, his voice regaining its effortless authority, smoother now, lacking the earlier gravel. "Miss Hayes was just giving me a fascinating insight into Veridian's curatorial vision, away from the noise." He offered a bland, charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. David, visibly relieved, retreated. The door hissed shut, plunging them back into the charged quiet. The brief interruption was a bucket of cold reality. The gala, the sponsorship, the carefully constructed lives they had to return to. It all loomed. Evelyn took a deliberate step back, putting physical space between them, needing to breathe air untainted by his proximity. "We have a room full of people expecting us, Mr. Thorne," she stated, her voice cool, professional, a lifeline back to the known world. "Marcus," he corrected softly, a plea woven into the single word. She ignored it, turning towards the door. "The acquisition proposal is on your table. I trust you'll find Veridian meets Aether's exacting standards." The words tasted like ash, transactional, exactly what she'd always known art to be. Now, It felt like a desecration of the connection that had sparked in the shadows. He didn't try to stop her as she walked back into the glittering fray. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles, strategic conversations, and the constant agonizing awareness of Marcus Thorne moving through the crowd. He played his part flawlessly, the powerful, engaged benefactor, but his gaze, whenever it found hers across the room, held a silent question, a shared secret that thrummed beneath the surface of the performance. The fortress was breached. There was no going back to the pristine silence of before. The days that followed were a landscape of subtle, seismic shifts. The Veridian Gallery, Evelyn's meticulously ordered kingdom, began to reflect the turmoil within. The harsh, clinical lighting in the main foyer was softened slightly. Warm spotlights added to highlight the textures of a newly installed bronze piece, something raw, emotional, chosen by Evelyn on an impulse that would have horrified her former self. In her office, the obsidian sculpture remained, cold and beautiful, but now a single, vibrant, abstract painting, a tempest of blues and silvers she'd pulled from storage, leaned against the wall opposite her desk. It wasn't hung yet. It was a question mark, a splash of chaos challenging the order. Marcus Thorne's world changed too. His sprawling, minimalist penthouse, a monument to cold efficiency and billion-dollar views, began to show signs of life. A woven throw, rich with earthy colors, appeared draped over the back of a sterile white sofa. Books stacked on a side table, not pristine first editions, but well-thumbed paperbacks on art history and urban architecture. And on a previously empty wall in his home office, illuminated by a carefully positioned light, hung the small, vibrant abstract Evelyn had tentatively placed in her own space. A silent declaration, a piece of her chaos anchoring his order. They didn't speak of the balcony. They didn't speak of Mark. Communication evolved into a new, intricate language built on presence, touch, and the charged space of shared silence. He started appearing at the gallery, not for scheduled meetings, but unexpectedly, often near closing time. He'd stand before a piece she'd recently acquired, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, the CEO suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the strong forearms she remembered. She'd find reasons to linger nearby, rearranging brochures on a plinth, ostensibly checking the lighting. "Still drawn to the broken things, Mr. Thorne?" she asked one evening, her voice carefully neutral, as he studied the cracked concrete photograph. She stood a few feet away, the scent of lemon cleaner from an earlier pass mingling faintly with his sandalwood. He didn't turn, but a smile touched the corner of his mouth, not broken, enduring. He gestured towards the struggling weeds. "See how it reaches for the light? Persistent, admirable." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes holding hers, unlike some things that remain stubbornly hidden in the shadows. His gaze flickered meaningfully towards the vibrant abstract leaning against her office wall, visible through the glass. A flush warmed her neck. "Some things require the right light to be revealed," she countered, crossing her arms. "Preferably not the harsh glare of an interrogation lamp." He chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated pleasantly in the quiet space. Point taken. Perhaps softer lighting, more intimate. He took a step closer, his presence a tangible warmth. "Would it be terribly unprofessional to ask the director for her expert opinion on placement? I find myself aesthetically challenged." Her lips twitched, despite herself. Aesthetically challenged. The man who owns half the tech world. "Surely you have algorithms for that." "Algorithms are terrible at capturing feeling," he murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "They can't measure the way a particular shade of blue can make your breath catch." He nodded towards the painting in her office. "Or the way a certain curve," his eyes traced the line of her shoulder, "demands attention." The banter was a dance, flirtatious and charged, a safe conduit for the dangerous attraction simmering beneath. It was intellectual sparring layered with unspoken heat. "Careful, Mr. Thorne," she warned, though her voice lacked its usual ice. "Your janitorial alter ego had more subtlety." "Mark didn't have the luxury of stating his intentions," Marcus replied, a spark of challenge in his eyes. He closed the remaining distance between them, stopping just outside the boundary of her personal space, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the unique blend of sandalwood and clean cotton. Marcus Thorne, however, he's learning to be direct. That painting, he gestured again towards her office. "It belongs on the wall, not hiding. And you," his gaze swept over her face, intense, appreciative, "shouldn't hide either." Her carefully constructed professional distance felt paper-thin. "Directness can be disruptive," she breathed. "Disruption," he countered softly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "can be the beginning of something extraordinary, like life insisting through concrete." He held her gaze, the unspoken invitation hanging between them, warm and undeniable. Dinner. Not a business meeting, just dinner. Evelyn looked into his eyes, seeing the CEO, the janitor, the man who'd shattered her trust, and then caught her tear. She saw the vulnerability beneath the power, the honesty beneath the lie, the intense, terrifying pull that had been there since the night of the spilled water. The fortress walls were gone.
What remained was a terrifying openness and the consuming current pulling her towards him. Yes, she heard herself say, the words surprisingly steady, just dinner.
Dinner became a series of quiet explorations, not in Michelin-starred restaurants Marcus owned shares in, but in tucked-away bistros with warm lighting and the comforting clatter of kitchens. Conversation flowed easier now, less guarded, laced with the flirtatious banter that had become their lingua franca. They talked art, not as transactions, but as shared passion. He spoke of the frustrating isolation of his wealth, the constant performance. She spoke of the suffocating pressure of maintaining perfection, the loneliness at the top of her meticulously curated world. The silences between words were deep, comfortable, charged with an intimacy built on shared understanding rather than words. Touch became their primary vocabulary, a brush of his hand against hers as he passed her the salt cellar, sending sparks up her arm, her fingers lightly tracing the familiar line of his jaw as they debated the merits of a controversial sculptor, the gesture casual yet profoundly intimate, his palm resting possessively, reassuringly, on the small of her back as they navigated a crowded street. The warmth of his thigh pressed against hers beneath a small bistro table, a silent anchor. Each touch was a word, a promise, a rebuilding of trust on a foundation more tactile than verbal. Evelyn found herself sketching again, not hidden scraps, but bold, expressive pieces that poured out of her in a torrent she hadn't experienced in years. Charcoal gave way to vibrant oils, canvases filled with swirling emotions, dark blues and grays giving way to bursts of gold and silver, sharp lines softening into fluid curves. Her art became a mirror of her internal thaw, a language for the transformation she couldn't yet voice. Marcus became her quiet champion, using his considerable influence not to interfere, but to create space, connecting her with a prestigious gallery owner who saw the fire in her new work. One rainy Saturday afternoon, they were in his penthouse. Evelyn stood bathed in the grey natural light, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, studying the vibrant abstract now proudly hung on his wall, her painting, her chaos, integrated into his ordered space. Marcus approached, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He handed her one, his fingers lingering against hers. "Still think it's too disruptive for the space?" she asked, nodding towards the painting, a playful challenge in her eyes. "Throws off your feng shui?" He stood beside her, shoulder brushing hers, gazing at the swirls of color. "Disruptive?" He shook his head, a soft smile playing on his lips. "No, essential. It's the heartbeat this place was missing." He sipped his coffee, like the chamomile tea on a stressed director's desk. Unexpected, necessary. She leaned slightly into his warmth. Mark had better instincts than Marcus Thorne about some things. Marcus said quietly, turning to face her fully, "was a part of me I'd forgotten existed. The part that could appreciate quiet competence, simple kindness, breathtaking beauty, without needing to own it." He reached out, tucking a loose curl behind her ear, his calloused thumb grazing her temple. "He saw you first, and he was overwhelmed." The tenderness in his touch, the honesty in his words, melted the last remnants of icy resistance within her. She turned into him, setting her mug aside. Her hands rose, framing his face, her thumbs tracing the strong line of his cheekbones, the faint stubble along his jaw. His eyes, that intense blue, darkened, holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Evelyn," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. She didn't answer with words. She stretched up, closing the small distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a hesitant exploration, but a claiming, a culmination. The kiss was deep, slow and all-consuming, a fusion of the controlled director and the passionate artist, the powerful CEO and the empathetic janitor. It tasted of coffee and shared secrets, of betrayal forgiven and a future being forged. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, the solid warmth of his body a shelter against the rain-streaked world outside. The silent current that had pulled them from the beginning finally crested, washing over them in a wave of profound, undeniable connection. The fortress was gone. In its place was an open sky, vast and terrifying and breathtakingly beautiful. Months later, the opening night of Evelyn Hayes' solo exhibition pulsed with a different energy than the Aether Gala. This was warmer, buzzier, filled with genuine excitement and the electric hum of artistic discovery. The gallery walls, once stark white, now seemed to embrace the bold, emotive canvases displayed. Evelyn's soul laid bare in swirls of color and texture. The air smelled of champagne, yes, but also of fresh paint and the warm, spicy scent of the catered canapes Evelyn had insisted on, a world away from the gala's sterile elegance. Evelyn stood near the center of the main gallery, not as the untouchable director, but as the artist revealed. She wore a dress of deep emerald silk that flowed like liquid,
complementing her dark skin and the vibrant energy radiating from her. Her posture was still regal, but softened, open. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes, crinkling the corners as she spoke animatedly with a cluster of admirers. The sharp edges were still there, the fierce intelligence, but they were now integrated with a newfound warmth, a vulnerability that made her beauty even more profound. Marcus Thorne stood slightly apart, leaning against a pillar, observing her. He wore a well-cut but comfortable navy suit, no tie, his sleeves rolled up. The billionaire CEO aura was still present, a natural magnetism, but it was tempered by a quiet contentment, a watchfulness that held no calculation, only deep admiration. His gaze rarely left Evelyn, a small private smile playing on his lips as he watched her engage, passionate and alive in her element. He finally pushed off the pillar and made his way through the crowd towards her. The guests parted subtly, sensing the connection. Evelyn turned as he approached, her smile deepening, a private light igniting in her dark eyes. "Quite the turnout, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice warm, holding a familiar teasing note. He handed her a fresh glass of champagne, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. "Though I suspect some are only here for the free champagne and the chance to say they knew you before you became insufferably famous." She took the glass, her fingers lingering against his for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Nonsense, Mr. Thorne," she countered, her eyes sparkling. "They're clearly here for the compelling narrative of the reclusive tech mogul slumming it in the art world." She took a sip, regarding him over the rim. "Does my rampant success threaten your delicate CEO ego?" He chuckled, a low, rich sound that drew a few glances. And slightly intimidating, he leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Also, I bought 3 pieces already, just to ensure my continued access to the artist's good graces." Her eyebrow arched. "Bribery, Marcus. How very corporate of you. I thought Mark had better morals." Marcus murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fleeting, heated second before meeting her eyes again. Understood the value of strategic investment, especially when the returns are. His eyes swept over her face, incalculably beautiful. The flirtatious banter flowed easily, layered with shared history and deep affection. It was a public dance, a continuation of their private language. He touched the small of her back, a proprietary grounding gesture as another well-wisher approached Evelyn. She leaned into the touch instinctively, a silent acknowledgement. Later, as the crowd began to thin, they found themselves standing before the exhibition's centerpiece, a large, breathtaking canvas titled Convergence. It depicted a powerful interplay of dark, controlled geometric shapes being gently invaded, transformed, and ultimately illuminated by swirling currents of vibrant fluid color, silvers, blues, and unexpected bursts of gold. It was abstract, yet undeniably personal, a visual symphony of their journey. They stood side by side, studying it in comfortable silence. The murmur of the remaining guests, the clink of glasses being cleared, faded into a distant hum. The gallery lights softened, highlighting the painting's intricate textures. Evelyn felt the familiar warmth of Marcus beside her, the solid, reassuring presence that had become her anchor. Without looking at her, his hand found hers. His fingers, strong and familiar, calloused from years of physical work, and the grip of power, intertwined with hers. A perfect fit. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand within his, lacing their fingers together tightly. The simple contact spoke volumes. Trust, understanding, a bond forged in fire and tempered by tenderness. Her head tilted, coming to rest lightly against his shoulder. She felt the solid muscle beneath the fine fabric, the steady rhythm of his breathing. A deep, contented sigh escaped her, barely audible, a release of tension she hadn't realized she still held. It was a sound of profound peace, of homecoming. Marcus turned his head slightly, his lips brushing against her temple in a feather-light kiss. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His thumb stroked gently over the back of her hand. They stood there, before the painting that told their story in color and form, bathed in the soft gallery light, fingers intertwined, her head resting on his shoulder. The world around them continued, the cleanup, the final farewells, but they existed in a quiet, perfectly understood universe of their own making. The silent current that had begun as a faint, unsettling pull in the cold marble halls of the Veridian had deepened, widened, and become an unbreakable, all-consuming tide. It had reshaped them, eroded their defenses, and deposited them here, not on opposite sides of a divide, but together on a new shore, transformed and irrevocably bound. The fortress was gone. In its place stood something far more resilient, a love built on seeing and being truly seen. The silent current had become the deep, enduring sea,